This is a Team Objection Podcast for December 20th, 2022, episode 556. And unlike last week, I came prepared so that we're not spoiling anything. This, of course, is our third week of the top video games of all time. We're updating the list from 10 years ago. If you haven't been watching to this point, what are you doing? Go watch the last two episodes. Today, we'll be doing 15 to 6. And then, of course, next week, we'll be counting down the top 5. And boy, is it a doozy of a top 5. As we look for the best game ever made, updated from 10 years ago. If you're eagle-eyed, you'll have noticed we've changed outfits. Me especially, because some people have been changing shirts in between weeks, but I've been lazy. Also, I shaved, so there's a lot of clear differences. But it's a new recording session, and now we're firing with new energy, and we're ready to go.
And my shirt is a spoiler.
I have much less beef in this next 9 games, 10 games, whatever. Much less beef. One beef token. One token of beef, and the rest, they're pretty good, I think.
Does that mean you can buy beef with that token? Is that how that works?
Yeah, you get one token, you exchange it for beef. Right. It's a barter system.
At the beef arcade.
Yes.
Cool. Beef jerky is really pricey, so I would like to have your beef token, please, to use on beef jerky.
I can split it in half, but then neither of us can get anything.
Nobody gets anything. This is compromise.
Doesn't recognize the coin. It was a terrible decision.
Yeah, we'll get to the beef, but this is the beef that Chris alluded to before. He is prepared to defend. He is prepared to defend the beef. I'm coming with the beef token. He is coming with the beef shield. So we will see what happens when we get there. I
will also say we can only kind of talk about part of this. I think our entire top 20 is pretty rock solid. You can quibble with ordering, but I don't really have any qualms with anything that made it up to this level.
I would say starting today, I agree. Even top 19, I would say great.
Again, not talking about order. I'm just saying the games that are in the top 20. So that includes The Witcher.
Okay. Yeah.
But again, you can quibble with the rankings and stuff, and some of that's personal preference. I just think all top 20 games are games I rock with. I'm like, yeah, those deserve to be in this conversation. Again, maybe you think some should be higher or lower, but there's no outliers anywhere in that top 20 to me as far as what made it into there somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, especially for I know Disco Elysium. People like it's the greatest game ever made. Well, I haven't played it yet. We're not paid to do this. We do it because we love it. We'll get there eventually. We're doing our best. We haven't played everything. So sometimes when I see somebody's top 100 list, some publication, it's games I haven't heard of. I'm like, well, great. I'll get there eventually, but I can only play what I can play. So
that's what I'm happy about. On the top 20, I've played all but basically 2 games, I think.
Yeah, you've ramped up your game playing a bit. You have a hole, I think, in your history. You're good in the beginning, and then you're good now in the end. And then in the middle, there's a big hole.
I feel like 2014 to 18 with newborns in 2 years. I don't know. Maybe that had something. Nah, I mean, whatever. It's fine.
But you did play some of the big hitters during that time. Like Breath of the Wild was, I think, 2017. God of War was 2018.
I played that after the fact when
I know, but still, we're catching you up,
Yeah, exactly.
Elden Ring will be next. Probably not.
I don't think actually. So. There's a couple other games on this list that I think should be next and might actually be, but we'll see.
In fact, Elden Ring might never happen, but we'll get there.
Alrighty, let's jump in then. We're going one by one, of course. Again, the 10 for today, the 5 for next week. And number 15 is probably going to surprise some people, but I'm here to defend it. It's Final Fantasy X.
Yeah, to me, this is probably the closest thing to an outlier that I have in this list entirely.
I gotta switch views. Hold on. There we go. We won't cut off Sean.
But
there we go.
But I at least will concede a lot of people really love this game. And it was groundbreaking in a lot of ways.
I am so this game to me, I think I rated it number 2 or 3 on my list overall. 2. Thank you.
Where does Chris know what you rated and you don't know what you rated it?
I figured where it was. I just couldn't remember if I put one. Anyway, my point is, to me, it's the best Final Fantasy game at all. It is the best battle system in Final Fantasy by far. I get frustrated with the active time battles. Part of the fun of Final Fantasy is plotting out your attacks, knowing what's coming. Okay, I've got this guy's this attack, and I know this guy's going to attack soon me. So then I've got to figure out what's going to counter that. Final Fantasy 10 removes all pretense, and it says, here's your list. Here's what's coming. You can manipulate that list a little bit, but here's what's coming. Figure it out. You better plan for it, because the next 3 hits is the boss, and he's going to hit you hard. So you better figure out what's going on. I love that strategy. The switching out of people, the specialization. The story is its only weak part, I'll say. It's convoluted. It's got some preachy messages and blatant racism, but it's okay. It's still a good story, I think.
It's like weirdly pro-religion and also extremely anti-religion.
Very much so.
At the same time, which I guess you could argue is kind of a cool decision in a way,
Mhm.
but there are certainly moments where you're like, okay, but I don't really care about praising Yevon right now. I'm just interested in like what's going on between the party and figuring out what's happening with like Titus and the mystery around Orin and like all this other stuff, more so than I do the world of Spirit itself.
The orange twist is great. That's great.
Yep. The Sin twist is pretty good too.
Yeah.
But I think the Orin twist is actually better.
The orange twist is great. I think it's so cool. The whole story of like there was a group that did this before. Now you're like the new group. I love it. Anytime storytelling does that. And then Orin is like, you know, his whole thing being part of the previous group. And now here it's like the anti-Aerith twist, you know? She died. Orin came back from death, kind of.
I do like some little things. They hint at it throughout the game. You know, Seymour ones. They say that the Guado have a scent for the afterlife, and one time Seymour looks at him and goes, "Why are you still here, sir?" Thinking that he means in the room, but no, he meant still here. Like, why are you not dead? Basically, which I love.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. There's just so many good. There's so many good parts of it. There's so many good. I don't know. There's something to this game. The characters, the fact that it broke ground in the voice acting. It's not great voice acting by any means, but it's still one of the first.
Hugely important. Yeah.
Yes.
And the facial animations, which again only really click in the cutscenes themselves. Because you look back on it now, and some of those faces are kind of like, and it's not the best. But again, this was 2001. In fact, a couple of months, if I'm not mistaken, before a certain thing that sort of changed America. So, like, it's easy to forget. It's been more than 20 years, and the game still holds up pretty well. The HD remaster obviously helped with that quite a bit, but still, like, it pioneered a lot of things. Now, Square Enix, of course, has always been ahead of the curve when it came to visuals, so we were not necessarily shocked by that fact. But you look at Final Fantasy IX, and you look at Final Fantasy X, and then you realize those games are less than 4 years apart, and you go, oh, and that's not to say 9 looks bad. It's just a very different direction for the series at that point.
I remember, I have a very distinct memory of playing Final Fantasy X, I think in 2002 was the first time I ever tried to play it. And that first cutscene where they break from, you know, the normal gameplay to the cutscene, I was like, this is the most realistic thing I've ever seen in my life. Oh my God, this will never get any better. Like,
well, it shows you the difference though between the PS2 and the PS1 as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this was... Yeah, so I mean, my main beef is I have two beefs. Two beefs with this one.
Not higher? Is that one?
The remaster addresses one of the beefs, which is you can turn off random encounters so that you can just do the puzzles. There is nothing in gaming more frustrating than random encounters, especially if I don't quite know the solution yet to the puzzle, and I'm going back and forth, and I keep getting in fights. I fucking hate it.
And there's some really bad examples on the Cloister of Trials in this game.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
where
exactly.
You definitely do not want to be caught in the glass shattering over and over and over again.
Yep. So there's that. The other beef is, this is a small beef. This is a personal thing. It matters to me. The emphasis on like weapons is not really there. Like Tidus has the sword and maybe a couple options throughout the game, and that's pretty much it, right?
So it's more customization of your weapons, which I'm okay with. I mean, it's about getting, once you get Riku, you can use items to customize your weapons, and the most valuable ones are the slots, the ones that have a bunch of slots so you can plug in things and change around, which I like to that sense. I don't know, there are times I kind of like simplicity when it comes to those things where it's like, okay, this is your weapon. You can improve it by doing X, Y, Z, instead of being like other Final Fantasy games where it's like, okay, I've got this crappy weapon. Oh my God, I found this great one. And you switch it out and all of a sudden you're just super powerful.
I love it.
You grow a little bit more.
I was born and bred, Dave. You go to a new town and you want to discover the new town because there's a new shop with all new stuff. That's like old school formula. Speaking of formula, I just have one last thing on it because I know we need to move on.
I have two questions.
I don't understand why we can't have games like this anymore. Like, I look at something like Persona 5 and The Tactics Reborn, Tactics Ogre Reborn, where it's a grid base, but it's turn based. And Dave, you reminded me, you see the order of everybody on the bottom of the screen at all times, and so you can be really strategic and like target people that you know are going to go next in the order, so they don't get a turn and all that. I don't know why it's like no, everything's active now.
I can't figure out like. I know Final Fantasy VII, the original one, had a active time system, but like the new one, the remake, I have a hard time wanting to get into because of the difference in battle system. It's like I just love turn-based. I think it's just such a great battle system. It's strategy so much more than trying to actively fight. I don't know.
It doesn't have to be like slow and plot.
No.
So you know,
and there are still some games that are carrying that torch, including. Octopath Traveler, which I don't think got any votes from us, but is a game Sean and I both liked quite a bit. The Grandia series, the Trails series, which I know how much Dave loved this combat system. He would like the Cold Steel games for their battle system, but you would hate how long they are and you would hate the stories. So I can't recommend them to you. So like there are franchises that are trying, but I'm with you where it feels like we've almost overcorrected now, and now even the Final Fantasy franchise itself. I mean, 16 is going to be the most action-heavy game we've seen yet, and I'm excited for it.
Yeah,
but it's not what I loved about the series 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Last question I have before we move on to the next one.
Yeah.
Sphere Grid. I need to know the opinions of the Sphere Grid.
Awesome.
Yeah, I like it.
Because to me, so like Tales of Xillia had a system that was very close to this. It's part of why I still love that game. The difference with Xillia was when you got to the max level, you filled in everything. So while your decisions mattered over the course of the game, at the end of the day, you were going to end up with the exact same Jude or whoever. In this game, you can't possibly fill everything in unless you're grinding to some absurd level. So you have to kind of decide, like, you're going to fill most of your character's path, and then maybe you have enough time to start, okay, I'm going to dip, let's say, Yuna into Lulu's path. So she picks up some black magic on white magic. I love the customization of it, and the fact that you can kind of jump turns with some of the fancier spheres. And, like, to me, it's still one of the better systems an RPG's ever done. I know people really like 12s as well. To me, it's a matter of preference, but I think both are way up there for me.
12 is the best, especially because you can now see where you're going when you couldn't see. That was a pain in the ass. I was under the impression the Sphere Grid was more linear than that. So the fact that it's not, I like that.
It starts out super linear in the sense that right when in the very beginning you have each player's path, each character's path, and you are on it. Once you get towards the end of their path, there's different sphere grids that you can jump to one that spheres that you can use where you can jump to somebody that's already claimed one. You can jump to the position of another person. Like Chris said, you can move Yuna to Lulu's, and all of a sudden now Yuna becomes the most overpowered character by far because her magic is so high, and you get her with the powerful black spells, and you're like, oh well.
You should probably check out 12 at some point.
Yeah.
Anyways, so yeah, Final Fantasy X.
Yep.
Dave, number 2, my number 10. I had a rock solid top 7, which is kind of ironic considering our group had a rock solid top 7. There's a huge gap between 7 and 8. But this was in my top 10. It moved up from the last time for me. It moved up from the last time in our group list. And I'm kind of okay with it because of what it meant for the transition of RPGs in America. So I'm kind of happy with it. I don't know if it can be any higher, but... Number 14 is A Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, and like another game we haven't gotten to yet, this isn't my fault this time. Last time I had both of these SNES classics, this one and the heretofore unnamed one that we're going to get to, in my top 5. Didn't do that this time. I moved both of them down. Last time I did it because I knew no one else was going to vote for them. This time I did not know other people were going to, but I moved them down anyways. 7 people voted for this game, including all 3 of us. So to me, it seems like a pretty worthy representative. Again, I don't know that it can be any higher than this, but I'm pretty pleased with the way it turned out.
This one helped that I actually played it. When our first one 10 years ago, I hadn't played it yet. So interesting that it took me, past. It came out 20 years before we did our first voting, and yet I just played it now. But still, thank you, Switch Virtual Console.
I think it needs credit for just being. It deserves credit for being such a well-built game. Like there's so much that you can do. There's so many secrets. There's so many like Easter eggs. The order that you can tackle things in can change. It's just like expertly crafted. And it's a game I look at, I'm like, how did they do that? Whereas like some of the 3D games nowadays are like, that's impressive, but well, maybe not Zelda, but it's more linear and you can feel it. This was, especially for the time, and for what came before it was groundbreaking in so many ways.
Obviously, the original NES game takes some credit for all this development. I mean, a lot of the secrets and the world map layout and the dungeon system. I get it. And The Legend of Zelda got 2 votes from our panel. It didn't come anywhere near the top 50, 75.
I love it.
Yeah. Still kind of holds up in some ways, right? But to me, this was the perfect iteration for a lot of the reasons you just said. It brings us a much more interesting story. It brings us several staples of the series, like the Master Sword that became, just inseparable from Zelda going forward. And then, the light Dark World stuff. To me, there are several games, some of which we've already covered, some of which we're still going to get to, that I'm sort of amazed that, again, this is, the mid-1990s. And that's the level of game design we were cranking out at the time. It sort of makes you appreciate, this is why a AAA game might take 5 years to make, because the expectations are so through the roof now. And a lot of that has to do with the groundwork that was set back then.
Was this the best story in gaming when it came out? It has to be up there.
At that time, it was quickly surpassed by another game that we also still haven't gotten to yet. But at the time, maybe, especially in doing a lot with a little, because there's not a whole lot of dialogue. Especially because Link is silent, obviously. There's a really compelling intro and then a few other things throughout the game. Like Sahasrara gives you some information and blah, blah, blah. But for what it does with storytelling of environment, I think it's phenomenal.
Yeah, it wasn't just a premise. It was actual story. There was the establishment and then, the Dark World and you're the bunny rabbit and you're struggling and all the way to the twist at the end. And yeah, I mean, it's impressive.
I gotta say, I played this only a couple years ago, if that. I mean, maybe a year and a half ago, maybe, and I enjoyed it a lot. Because just for whatever reason it slipped by me. I'm kind of glad I had a guide at this time to kind of just check into things because I didn't have the time to explore. But I can only imagine being a kid and having all that time to just roam the area and be like, I'm gonna find this and I'm gonna find this. I did get stuck in one thing where I missed, for some reason I missed, I think, the ice arrows. And so I fought the one dungeon boss where it was fire and ice. And I can only imagine being a kid without a guide thinking well, I'm screwed. What the hell do I do? And throwing myself at this thing 25 times. Games have come a long way since then, so they kind of guide you a little bit more. But still, for the time, 1992, it's insane how advanced this was.
Yeah. Especially for how difficult of a dungeon Turtle Rock is, and what a slog it is to get through it, to then get to a boss that you can't beat, and the game's just I don't know, die, I guess. There's no hand holding, there's no nothing. That you're trapped in that room, and you're gonna sit there, and you're gonna fucking die.
Yeah, and then eventually you go out and be like, fine, I'll go do something else, and then you come back 2 weeks later and all right, I guess I'll go search around and see if I find anything. Wait, ice arrow, that's weird.
Dave, that's a great point, though, it's some lens to judge these things with we just can't have anymore. Link's Awakening, I would get trapped on a dungeon for weeks, just one dungeon, whereas now as I run into something after 30 minutes because I don't have time, and it's solved. And you're just checking every room and going around. And I think that's a valuable part of the experience and an area where this game really excels is it's made to explore and you're still having fun, even though it's frustrating. It's still addictive to go through and try to, and once you find it, nothing feels better than that.
It's so different too when the past of save points where you had a specific point where you're going to save this game type of deal, as opposed to now where it just auto saves every 5 steps basically. And so there was a thing where you had to come back in when you had to turn the game off for the night, when mom yells at you to go to bed, you had to come back in and say oh, well, I've already done this. I have to redo a few things and maybe you'll take a different path because you don't remember exactly what you did to get to where you were. And all of a sudden, hey, you found something new that you didn't realize. At this point, now with autosaves the way they are, you don't really have that. You kind of pick up right where you left off, which is good in some ways. And it doesn't have that. We almost play games nowadays where it's almost spoiler free. If you and I, if all the three of us are playing the same game at the same time, we're not going to talk about, oh yeah, what part are you on? Where are you going? We might do a little bit of that, but we're not sharing secrets we kind of had to back then.
The irony there is that it's easier to do that now than ever.
Yeah, I know.
Before you wouldn't talk to your friends about a video game. What are you going to do? Call them on your landline?
Yeah, but
in the other room from the TV? No.
You go to each other's houses and watch each other play, and then go home and be like, oh shit, that's what I need to do.
So Dave, you're kind of on fire tonight because I do want to say like that observation. It's interesting that you have to acknowledge it because it is baked into the product. Miyamoto was like, I made these games obtuse for the reason you shouldn't necessarily just be able to steamroll it yourself. It takes a community and it takes talking with your friends and solving it and hours of exploration and trial and error. And it's a very different approach to game design than we have now. And I think that's really interesting.
I mean, still fun game though. I mean, the fact that I can play it in 2020 or whatever it was, 20 years after it came out, I don't mind it being this high up the list. It's not my favorite Zelda, but it's great.
Just to recap, because I kind of want to do this for the games that we have left since they're all way up here. This was a 2nd, a 6th, a 10th, a 17th, a 22nd, a 28th, and a 39th. That's the 7 votes. Falling to the past here.
This will be, I know we need to move on. This is a point for Super Nintendo. I think this is like the peak of like ageless gaming, because like Nintendo, there's some gems, but they look really dated and kind of ugly. Super Nintendo, they've reached the point now where they still look amazing, and like the vision for what the game is perfectly represented in these sprites. Even though it's dated, it still looks great, and that's why we're getting this now like 2D Revolution thing. It's
cartoony stuff isn't going to improve graphics, which is why Wind Waker holds up to me so well.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's great.
Yeah, it's interesting just because like I think the NES had a lot of people that had similar visions, but it just wasn't up to the task as far as the technical aspects. This seems to be the perfect marriage of still early enough in the game, but it has enough juice in the system to kind of fulfill that vision people had.
Yep.
And of course, not just the SNES, the Genesis has some classics, whatever. But, that's the main example that we go to here. Number 13 is BioShock, up 12 spots from 10 years ago. It is also 7 votes, 309 points. It just eked out Link to the Past for this spot at 13th. Once again, and this is the case for almost everything in the top 15, all 3 of us voted for it. Of course, it's a large reason why it's here. We had points to give. But I wasn't sure what was going to happen with this just because of... Look, I mean, let's be honest. I hadn't played this last time, 10 years ago. It hadn't been out for all that long, but it had been out long enough I definitely could have. Never had an Xbox system, though, so that was certainly part of the problem. But I really, really enjoyed it. And look, we talked about twists earlier. What a fucking twist in this game.
Yeah.
The fact I have to go and question everything I've looked, like you talked earlier, Sean, about Final Fantasy, how you go to each town and when I go to a town, there's going to be this to buy and I have to upgrade my weapons. Everything. The narrator telling you where to go has been such a staple in gaming for so long. To have that flipped on its head was an awesome reveal. I really like that part. I mean, the scariness was the aura of the feeling of the game was great, but the flipping that narrative on the head and be like, oh shit, I have to go after this guy now who's been telling me where to go. It's fantastic.
It's like the perfect marriage of everything that makes a game good, and it plays on the fact that you are playing a game, right? With that twist and with that whole approach. I love the setting and the claustrophobic environment. I was so hyped for this game. I was reading all the magazine articles talking about this world, the blending of like the Atlas Shrugged sort of Ayn Rand into the narrative. There's some flaws now that at the time I think were pretty revolutionary, but now I like don't care. No one plays this game evil. Like, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Like, you have to be a real piece of shit, and the benefits aren't even pronounced enough to make it like worth it. So you never really struggle with it. So it's almost like Walking Dead, where there's like a choice, but there's not really a choice. But that aside, I loved the power up. I felt it. This is another one of the things, Dave. It makes you question, like, well, yeah, why was I doing this mission? And who was telling me all that? It also, though, reflects, like, the allure of this Adam. Because I, as the player, was like, oh, like, I want it. I want those new power-ups, and I want to scrounge everything. Exploring the environment was so huge. I loved getting all of the auto recordings. I still think this is the best example in any game of the secondary, like, find these recordings, adding so much to the flavor of the world. Man, it's just so good. And the last boss fight, everybody complains about it. Yeah, I agree. It's not great, but I think it's such a minor flaw. And by that point, who gives a shit? I mean,
people had the same complaint in Final Fantasy X with the last boss fight. I mean, the last boss fight is a joke in Final Fantasy X. Like, it truly is.
Yeah.
But still, it doesn't matter because the journey up there was so good, I think.
And I think the final boss still works from a story perspective. Is the fight any good? Not really, but I think in both those games you can argue, like, okay, it may not be the most fun for the player, but at least I get what they're going for thematically.
Yeah.
And I love, in this game, sometimes when you play certain games, Resident Evil 4 did this for me, BioShock did this for me. When you come around the corner and see a Big Daddy and you go, holy shit, I gotta get it. Like, when you have like anxiety building up because you see an enemy that's like, he is going to fuck me up if I try to stay here. It's a fun part of a game when you're like, okay, I gotta figure out some way around it because this guy is gonna mess with me.
And it was kind of funny to watch people. I mean, look, I liked Metroid Dread quite a bit. It got a couple of votes. Again, nowhere near making the cut. But there were a handful of folks that you could tell, like, oh, you sweet summer child, you're new to gaming, so you don't understand your history, who were talking about the Emmys. Is like, I've never really seen an enemy like this before where you can just turn a corner and all of a sudden it's there. It's going to fuck you up. It's like, well, I'm not saying BioShock was the first, but it was definitely a huge one back in the day where you turned a corner, like you said, and you went, oh, God.
There's a Big Daddy there. I'm screwed.
Mm-hmm.
And such an interesting relationship because you're like, oh, fuck. But you're also like, oh, yeah, because now it's your opportunity to get a bunch more Adam, and you have to start planning, like, what are the traps? And this is where 2 really excels. And I know we didn't vote for it because this game, in a lot of ways, is better, and it was the first one. But, like, giving value to weapons maybe you weren't using before, like the tripwires and the mines, and, like, creating this death trap for the Big Daddy. So fun. Dave, if you haven't done, I think it's called, the achievement is Big Brass Balls.
I think I've seen it.
But it's a hard mode with no Vita chambers.
Yeah, no thanks.
Sounds awful. But like it unlocks this whole new dimension to the game and you approach it in a different way that makes it really fun. And it just gives me like more points towards this game.
Well, and you care about achievements and I don't. So
I really am saying like not just for the achievement, but just like I like it when achievements change the way I think about a game and when the game can support it. Some games like beat it on hard. It's like, yeah, but this game sucks on hard. You didn't balance it at all. This is a great example.
Yeah, beating it on hard just means, well, I died 500 times. Great. I'm glad I slogged my way through it. Like beating Halo on Insanity. It's like, well, I'm going to plow my way into that. And here I go again. And here, I don't know. Like, that's
but having to be strategic about everything, kind of slow moving, methodical, like that made it fun. And it's just another way to play it. Or you could go wrench build. And just that's your only weapon, and you just whack the shit out of people. So there's so much depth to the combat. It gets more complex later when you can dual wield and all of that. But man, they got so much right in this game.
Yep.
I love the dialogue too.
Yeah, I don't know. There's so much right to the dialogue, the story, the dystopian nature of trying to build utopia. It's great.
A third, 2 sevenths, an eighth, a 21st, a 33rd, and a 38. So again, big time support. It took that to get anywhere near the top part of our list, which is why I think it holds up so well, because luckily our group is pretty solid overall. Sure, people have their own little eccentricities, but like I think the list works, and this is part of the reason why.
Yep.
Number 12 is Hades, which might surprise some people.
This is the number one thing if I'm like, is this recency bias? I don't know. This is a game that of our entire list hits me with the biggest concern. But as of right now, I feel like it's the right call. It's really freaking good.
I think if this was 2020, I would be the same as you as far as concerned about recency bias. And, you know, we looked at that as a few things, you know, back in the last list 10 years ago, like Skyrim was recent then. And it's like, okay, is this really going to hold up? Is it a bug-ridden mess? Who knows, right? Now, there's been enough time, I think, since its release where I'm pretty comfortable with this. I think, you know, we might find that it's a little too high in 10 years from now when we do this again, but I don't think that's going to be the case. And I think looking at just the massive amounts of hardware it got the year it was released should probably tell us that we're okay here.
Well, it's among, if not the best roguelike ever made. It plays like, so Dave, you know, roguelike, do I need to explain this to you again? Okay. So most roguelikes, you die and it's like, okay, do another run. Normally the story ignores the part that you're dying repeatedly. Hades, it's built right into it. So you die, you go to do another run and like all the characters are acknowledging that you failed yet again. Or you've unlocked new dialogue because of you failed so many times, or you found something on the run. And the writing is really solid. So half the time my runs were driven by what roguelites are always driven by, which is like, what powers am I going to unlock? Like, what's going to be different this run? It was also powered by what am I going to see when I get back? And what new dialogue is there going to be? And if the writing is that good that that's happening, that's a really good sign.
Yeah, I mean, I get the appeal of that, where it's like, yeah, you died and had to go back to the beginning, but it's still a continuation in that sense.
Yeah.
So you get it's not feeling like you have to redo everything you did. It is okay. I have to go back to where I was, but there's going to be new stuff to complement my experience.
Yeah.
What's interesting to me is that in addition to what Sean already said, which is correct about like the game acknowledging your failed runs, it also acknowledges your successful ones. Like Meg is the first boss you fight in the game. Spoiler, Dave, sorry. And she has a stunning amount of dialogue for every time you roll through, especially as you start to make her kind of an afterthought because you're getting stronger and she's stuck in the same spot. So like even that part of it is also extremely well written. So the whole cyclical nature, whether it's the successes or the failures, is built in. Terrific art design, and to me, the fact that, I mean, I'm hesitant to talk about this game because I think it's the next one Dave should play. But the fact that you can beat the game and there's still more to it, and that's all I'm going to say about it,
more. Yeah.
is phenomenal because it takes quite a bit of effort just to get to that point, and then there's even more to come. So, like, to me, I came into this with pretty high expectations just because I got to it about 6 months after it came out, or maybe more, and like obviously by then its reputation was pretty well known. It still surpassed those in almost every way. The soundtrack's phenomenal. Again, gorgeous to look at. A ton of fun to pick up. Very diverse play styles, but all of which are viable. Like it just clicks.
That's I wanted to touch on. There's so many different weapons, Dave, that you can use. They're all great. Just depends on your play style. Same with the powers. There's some that's like high crit. There's some that one of my like the ice one, emphasis on freezing. That's all over the place, and all of them are fun. And it's fun to just go through and be like, I'm gonna try this god's boons this time and just see what it's like. It's great, man. And you just want to keep, like Chris said, you beat it and you just want to keep playing it to unlock more. And it doesn't even feel like, oh, now we're in the post game. You know, it's like, oh, this is just, I want to unlock the entire story.
That feels like Mario Odyssey in a way, where like you beat it, but you're like, yeah, but I'm like halfway done, even though I beat it in a sense.
Yeah, honestly, yeah.
Yeah, and look, we all strive for good post games. It's something like the Pokemon series have like abandoned the last decade. So like, there are certainly times where it's like I like a good post game because I want to live in the world that I've reshaped in this way. Well, this is a phenomenal example of it. So,
and this was frequently cited, Dave, as like the best, some of the best writing in gaming, some of the best depiction of relationships. More than one of the relationships in this game are like highly touted as like, this is a great example of X or Y. It's awesome.
And really great voice acting with a cast that's not the regular characters that you hear in a lot of other games.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know that I have many examples of things I would point out as flaws here. I think it does everything either really well or exceptionally well. So
I would say RNG sometimes you're trying to unlock something and you do a playthrough and it just like doesn't trigger like the dialogue or like
certain run combinations early on. But is that even like a Hades problem or is that a roguelike problem?
Yeah.
There's a gray area to it.
But it's almost flawless, really.
So is this, PS5, right?
Oh, it's
Switch?
all over the place now. Switch is a nice way to play it because you can just kind of stop whenever. It doesn't have to be the end of a run. So plenty of ways to play it now. It was a little bit more limited upon its first release, but it has improved a lot since then.
I would recommend it on the Switch, Dave, especially your situation.
I was doing the list. I should do it here. That was... So only 5 votes compared to the last two having 7, but a 5th, a 9th, a 14th, and a 19th.
Holy moly.
Well...
Yeah.
Interesting.
We can call them out. They're friends of the show. Both Michaela and Doug had it 5th.
5th, nice.
I had it 9th.
I'll make sure to give you back Returnal and I'll borrow this from you.
It was in my top 10. Again, like I had a clear 7. That was my top tier. But these were this Final Fantasy 10 and another game were all hovering. I was like, they're not quite there. But man, they're very, very, very good games.
You actually can't borrow it, which is this is a conversation everybody wants to hear about. But I digitally downloaded it, so
I think I did too.
Son of a bitch.
Yeah.
So
you just have to buy it. You just have to
pay for it with your hard-earned American money.
Let Michaela's vote say something. She doesn't play games like this. Mm-hmm. She just doesn't, and she loved it.
I mean, that is a good sign.
Yeah. Which means the trappings around the system were all phenomenal for her.
Mm-hmm.
Number 11 is Pokemon Red Blue with an asterisk because one of the votes was for Pokemon Fire Red, but I'm like, okay, unlike some of the other games we've talked about combining, like Awakening and Three Houses, those are still the same game. Yes, Fire Red has a lot of improvements and additions and whatever, but like at its core, it's 80% the same game. So basically that vote went towards Red Blue. Dropped a little bit from last time. It was number 6, I think, just because of how influential it was. Still, number 11 is not exactly like buried in the pantheon of best games. I think it's just a reflection of the fact that there's been so many other well-made ones in the last 10 years.
I don't know if there's a game, I think I've talked about this before, that I was more into than Pokemon ever in my life. Part of that was paired with the anime, which was smart marketing. They were very synced. It wasn't just me making these connections. Like, they did it on purpose, and it was awesome. Go in the backyard, pretend I'm playing Pokemon. Go inside to then play Pokemon. Yeah, it has some flaws. There's a lose condition that you can do where if you fuck up really bad, you just can't progress anymore. It's over. Some of the balancing is really off, but it doesn't matter because it's so brilliant. Catching monsters, making them fight, the designs are great. The 8 gem thing, now it's a little stale. Back then, it was awesome. I could go on and on. I fucking love this game so much.
I'll be the dissent because I'm 1996. I feel the sad thing is I remember I feel bad about myself for this, but I remember being a kid in 1996 and thinking like, Pokemon stuff's for dummies. Like, I thought it was for little kids, and I never once got into it as a kid. I don't know how. The only time I even heard anyone of my friends that played Pokemon was Chris in high school, and I'm like, I thought Pokemon was for dummies. Why are you playing it?
Well, it is for little kids. It's also for medium kids and adults and kind of everybody.
I get that now.
Yeah.
But in the 90s, I was just like, that's stupid Japanese thing that I don't understand, and I was
when
dumb
did this game come out?
97, I think, in the States. I think I just went with whatever the initial release date was, so that's 96
I was 11 years old. I was a little kid.
I was.
So were you, pretty much.
I know. I didn't have a Game Boy, and 2, I was like, oh, I'm going to be a basketball player, so that's all I care about. So
I think this shows kind of what a weird hybrid of nerd and sports fan I am, because there were certainly days at like freshman year of high school where I would be trading Pokemon with a certain group of friends before school started, and then would play like flag football at lunch with a different group of friends. Like, I guess I had both, so I definitely saw the argument. But to me, I don't know. I think it's very difficult to recapture how huge of a cultural phenomenon this was. I mean, we look at some of like the tent poles of history. This was mainstream in a way that very few video games ever touch. I mean, this was Beanie Babies level of like Beatles level of like fucking cultural explosion and impact. So like, I know I'm talking nonsense to people who didn't experience it, but just trust me when I tell you that like 25 years ago, this was enormous. And the fact that it is still as big as it is today, not that big, but the fact that it's still relevant and huge today tells you what a lasting footprint it has had.
This was a, 15-hour game? 20? If you just go from A to B?
Probably 20-ish, yeah.
I was probably 300 to 400 hours on this thing, man. Just exploring, trying to it was my goal at the time to catch all the Pokemon. And that was a very daunting task. What?
They told you to.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah, I was brainwashed.
Bet you can't eat just one. Well, there you go.
So much time spent in the Safari Zone trying to catch a fucking Tauros. And Kangaskhan, I don't know why they did the mechanics like that. It was such a bad idea.
Bait?
Yeah.
Rock?
And it never worked. I don't know why. But, man, so good. I love my team. I got them all like level 100. That's how you know there's a lot of time. It's like once you start getting... You fight the entire Elite Four and not get a level on your Pokemon at that point. Soloing it with one is crazy. You don't know what I'm talking about, Dave, but
my eyes are glossing over.
Gold Silver is a better game than this.
Oh, yeah.
In a lot of ways. I love it more than this. That's like my favorite from like a heartstrings perspective. Black White does such great things with the story. The series as a whole has introduced a ton of quality of life upgrades. Remember, there weren't even different physical and special attacks until the 4th generation. Yeah. Diamond Pearl. So like, there are so many ways that this game does not hold up. But at its time and for what it represents, it got my vote. I didn't even put Gold Silver on my list this time, and I did last time because I'm like, this is the important one. I love the others, but if we're doing a list of the most influential, best games of all time, this has to be there.
And for what it's worth, maybe it's completely nostalgia fueled, but I played through this a couple of years ago, had a fucking blast.
It's still
wonderful
fun.
time. Yeah,
it's a deeply flawed experience, but the core gameplay part of it is what has clicked this whole time.
Yep.
This was a first, a 9th, a 12th, a 14th, and a 15th in its 5 votes.
First, I gotta know first.
Duh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Given what his perspective was on it, talking about influence and stuff, I get it. I don't agree with it, but at the very least, it's like you can argue it was the. I don't know what the right adjective is because like biggest isn't really specific enough. But you know what I mean? Like it was, in some ways, the most important video game of all time.
You could not avoid it in the late 90s. Like no matter what, everyone knew what Pokemon was, and that is strange in a time where video games were still looked down upon if you played them. This helped break that gap, I think, for a lot of people.
And for me, it's also because of what it means for portable gaming. So, like, I'm not saying the portable gaming industry would have died if it wasn't for Pokemon, but keep in mind, like, the Game Boy Color came out in 1998. Okay? Think about that for a minute, for when the original Game Boy was. And why was that the case? Because you could have 2 slightly different color versions of Pokemon. That was the huge driver behind the Game Boy Color, and then obviously after that came the Advance and the DS and everything else that followed. So again, did it, like, make the handheld industry? No, but it sure made it, like... Now it wasn't an option, like a fun thing you could do on the side or a thing that made it, you could take it on a trip and play Tetris in the car. It was, you were missing out if you didn't have a portable system.
And it was revolutionary in the way that it did 2 versions with different Pokemon. And you could justify it back then in a way. I feel like you almost can't as much now. Like the 2 versions, I'm kind of like, why are we still doing that? Yeah. But back, Gold, Silver, Red, Blue, it made sense. And it encouraged you to actually buy the link cable and trade with your friends. And Dave, I gotta tell you, when I either battled my friend or traded Pokemon over this link, it felt like the absolute coolest thing in the world.
I can totally get, where you're just like, man, I've been wanting this one. You have it? Holy shit. Okay, I'll trade you. And like you plug that in and like that satisfaction of just like, it's like, oh, yes.
Yeah.
It was kind of like Pogs all over again.
Yeah.
The coolest thing about Pogs, like, oh, what Pogs do you have? Oh, you have an Alf Slammer? I'll trade you this one. And like that was like the swapping mechanic. Well, this sort of weaponized it in a way because it became part of the series core, as Sean mentioned, almost to a perfunctory level, to where now it's like, now there's no reason to do it anymore, but we still do.
Yeah. Yep.
So I don't know where you could argue this could be higher. You could argue it could be lower. I actually kind of like it just about where it is, to be honest.
I love it. And man, even just looking at that photo, I'm like, it makes me happy.
Yeah, there's certain endorphins that come out when you see that.
Yep.
Like the Mario title screen. You look at that and you go, ah.
Yep.
It is a little insane to me that how much my son is into Pokemon. Like he hasn't played through the games yet, and I want to get him into one. But like he has Pokemon like Legos and cards, and just like, how do you know this? This was popular when I was a kid.
Some things endure.
Yep.
Right?
And a lot of the fads that we liked as kids, like Pogs, are long forgotten.
Long dead.
And this,
long dead.
Sure, while Pokemon has its issues these days, it's still very much a mainstay in the conversation.
Yep.
Number 10 is Super Mario 64. Has 4 votes. I think it is the only game in the top 15 with 4 votes. That is correct. Everything else has at least 5, if not more. However, it had some influential votes, specifically like, maybe the 3 people on the screen, perhaps. Sean voted at 2nd. It also had an 11th, a 15th, and a 31st. But again, keep in mind, all 3 of us are weighted the strongest of any list, so if we all voted for it. To me, it almost could be higher. I'm surprised it didn't get more support from the other parts of the panel, because again, when you talk about influence in gaming, this is one of the most influential games of all time.
Yeah. It didn't move from 10 years ago, which I think is interesting that it was previously number 10 and it still is number 10. That's odd. God, this game, I'm sad that I never had an N64 at home, and my experience playing N64 is Chris bringing his over to my house. So that was fun. But still, like, the fact of playing through this game years later, still enjoy it, still finding new things, being able to run around and look around, the camera system being revolutionary. It's definitely not my favorite Mario game ever, but holy shit, what it did for 3D gaming, what it did for the industry, what it did for Mario, what it did for Nintendo. You can't debate that in any way.
Yeah, from what I've been told, when you take ecstasy the first time, you're chasing it every other time. You're never going to get that same feeling. Apparently not even close. And that's how I feel about like Mario 64. Like, I would go, and I don't like doing this with games. I'm like touching my head a lot because I'm like feeling so much emotion.
Oh my God. Did you take ecstasy?
I don't like playing games at other people's houses, or like if I can't make progression, I'm like, what's the point? I would do it with Mario 64 just to experience Mario in a 3D space. We talk about revolutionary. We've used this word a lot. Revolutionary, groundbreaking. Like, this is it. And if there is a game that competes with Pokemon for being the most into, it's probably Mario 64. I was addicted to this game. I wanted a Nintendo 64 for this reason. I had a friend who rented a Nintendo 64. Like, that used to be a thing. You could just like rent a console. And he got one of those ninja games. Chris, I forgot the name. Starts with a G. Anyways. No. It was like a cartoony ninja. And I was a nice kid, and I berated this kid so bad. I was like, what the fuck were you thinking? Yeah, Mario 64 right in front of you, and you go for this Musashi maybe? Anyways, bad call. He didn't go for Mario 64. I love this game. And playing it now, it's like, yeah, like Chris said, it's like you're playing underwater. Like, the mechanics are really rough. But, man, playing through it in, like, the year 2000, 1999, I love it.
This is my own anecdotal experience. Since I played it so much later, I mean, I played it in, like, 2000. Like I said, I think the first time I played it was probably when Chris brought it over to me. And seeing what Chris could do on it, and jumping around, leaping around, doing backflips and all that stuff. And I'm sitting here fumbling, trying to just walk straight because I'm not used to a 3D environment like this yet, was frustrating to no end. So I have a little bit of a skeptic view on this from a nostalgia point of view. But still, it's still fun. It's still the idea of like, I'm going to run around this thing and I'm going to go into the painting and I'm going to get this star and then I come back. Like, it had that feel that Mario 3 and Super Mario World gave you, where it was like, okay, I've got a world view. I'm going to, like, this is my base. Had that feeling, but it expanded on that in a cool way.
So many secrets too, which are a hallmark of a lot of the best Mario games. Yep. Again, we talked about that with World. Even 3 was pretty good about some of that stuff with, the warp pipes and the whistles and whatever. But like this one in particular, maybe just because the world was so bright and vibrant, even just exploring the castle. Like, the first time I found the slider level inside the Princess Peach portrait, I was like, holy shit. Like, what is that? I know I can jump through paintings. You taught me about that, but now I can jump through this fake wall that goes to a world, and this stained glass window that goes to a world. And like, just the fact they were able to load so much into a game. And again, this has no reason to be this good, as much of an early performer as it was for the N64.
And we saw that with every other 3D platformer released for like 5 years. It's
uncanny how far ahead of the curve Nintendo is sometimes with specifically its gameplay experiences, because obviously they struggle in other areas, like they've never been good at online play. But the fact that they can create such core gameplay experiences with new hardware has always been somewhat underrated somehow, even though they get credit for it. Because, like, imagine owning a Sega Saturn in 1996 and not getting an N64, and then this game comes out, and it's like, talk about a system killer. Like, when they killed the Saturn, the Dreamcast was dead on arrival. Like, Sega kind of died because of this game.
I'm kind of in that boat. In 1997, for my birthday, my parents basically said, "What do you want, PlayStation or N64?" And I picked PlayStation because I wanted the sports games and I wanted that type of thing. In hindsight, I remember my dad even saying, after we got the PlayStation, like, "Dave, I think we might have messed this one up." And I'm like, crap, you're right, I did.
You didn't. PlayStation was great too, but ideally you should have gotten both. Because...
yes.
Yeah, that would have been great.
Yeah.
I remember making money as a 12-year-old and being like, okay, Dad, the present was he's buying half of it and I had to pay for the other half. I'm like, okay, I can't afford 2 systems. I can't afford half of one, but I'm going to do my damnedest.
Yeah. That, man, there's magical. It's like, there's things that I can try to say about it and I just can't capture because there's just a feeling being at that time and having this game come out and doing things that we have never seen before. It was like if VR was good now, how I think that would be, but it's not, because they don't have a Mario in VR. That's probably what it's going to take.
Well, yeah, that type of experience in VR.
No, literally, it's probably going to take a Mario game in VR for them to figure VR out.
Yeah,
they got to figure out how to incorporate you. It's not a roller coaster. Riding a roller coaster, yay, that's my VR experience.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Because, like, in almost every way, Nintendo's been at the forefront of it. 3D gaming here, virtual reality with the Virtual Boy. Didn't work, but they were there. Like there's all these moments where you can be like, okay, Wii Sports was hugely important for motion and gaming. Like, so maybe we'll take Nintendo going into VR. But then they're going to need at least a Switch Pro to handle something like that, right? Because the Switch was 2017.
Chris, the Switch QDR or whatever the new one was.
Yeah,
imagine even figuring out the camera. Like, I mean, they ended up going a little bit too far because, like, well, we have to have a character who's like the cameraman.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, we don't need that. But, like, that's just such a challenge that I would not even think about initially, you know?
That game would have been phenomenal if it had either the Mario perspective or the Lakitu perspective, but it put in both because it recognized, like, there were some times where you couldn't see right if you couldn't get around an angle or something.
Yeah.
Yep.
Man.
Yep.
Like, it's almost, we could talk for another 15 minutes about it. It was so important as a pioneer, but you almost don't have to. Anybody who knows their gaming history should know what this represented.
Yeah.
Well, and it set the groundwork. I mean, Ocarina of Time doesn't, the camera angle thing doesn't work as well without this is kind of the base.
No, absolutely not. Yeah.
The next vote is also not my fault. It's not my fault. I'm not going to take the blame for it. I mean, it's on my list, and it was decently high, but our number 9 is Super Metroid. Again, I'm surprised by the high finish of some Super Nintendo classics. I had it 14th on my list, and Link to the Past was 17th, but they were like 2 and 4 last time for me, so I didn't push these up there this time. Instead, it was done by a first, a third, a 14th, and a 43rd, because Sean had it on his list as well. I don't think he had played it the last time we did this list, but I made him do it for our YouTube channel years ago. And at least I think it was enough for him to throw it on there to be kind of like, yeah, this was important. I know it's not his thing per se, but I was glad to see you put it on there.
I think...
And not ranked.
Yeah.
I think it's a mix. I imagine other people agree with it too. I think the speed running, the increase of popularity of that has definitely made people realize what a fucking classic this game is, because it's still like one of the most popular speedrun games. There's so much to it. There's so many different tricks and depth, and it's incredible. And again, the same thing with Link to the Past is like, how do you mechanically get a game so right when you're also pioneering it and it's like 20, 30 years ago? It's crazy.
When you go back to the 90s and think about what you had at your disposal in 1991 through 95, you're kind of like, holy crap, how did we have these? Super Mario World, Link to the Past, Super Metroid, Chrono Trigger, like all these things that's like, as a kid, you just pop these games and you're just like, I am going to be playing this for hours. Final Fantasy VI, for example, like, holy crap, I'm going to have so many things to do for so long.
Yeah.
Kind of remarkable. And now, again, we look back on it and I was a kid then, obviously, so I don't know if I had a full appreciation of it, but I remember just kind of being like, wow, like I'm looking at my SNES collection and I'm like, there's a lot of bangers here. And unlike the GameCube, which was like super top heavy, where it had some absolute classics and a bunch of shovelware bullshit, the SNES had plenty of stuff in the mid and lower tiers too, but like what it represented at the top was almost like a pinnacle of video gaming history.
Yeah.
It's kind of stunning when you think about it.
Yeah.
We brought up the story. This is a great one, a little more deliberate than Link to the Past that we talked about. Still understated. They let the ambiance and the environment do a lot of the storytelling for them, which is, I think, a great call. Like the isolation that you feel. It's kind of creepy. It's kind of scary for, I mean, what was capable back then.
Yeah, I mean, just the very beginning of the game, because you show up, you have a little bit of text and like a excellent opening song, and then like you just kind of land and you start figuring things out, like the first 2 Metroid games. But instead, you get the moment in the very beginning where it's like, so somebody shows up and steals this baby Metroid. Oh, it's Ridley. Oh, I'm gonna fight. Oh, I got my ass kicked. And like all of that works great. The escape sequence at the beginning of the game rather than the end, although there's one at the end too. Like all of a sudden, it hooks you in that first hour. And then, because it's already got you hooked, now it's about exploring that environment. Mm-hmm. So, like, yes, did Metroid Prime do the environmental storytelling better? Sure, but it was also almost 10 years after this. So, like, I'm pretty pleased. Because, again, I dropped it on my list because I wasn't going to try and game the system. I wasn't going to put things higher than I would normally just to get it represented in the top 25. Last time I voted this, and I was the only person who did, and it finished 33rd. It didn't even make our list. So I was just hoping it was going to make the top 25. The fact that it got this high, I'm pretty pleased with it.
Man, Nintendo's so genius. What I love is, like, so we have a plumber, platforming plumber. We got a exploring medieval sort of adventure game. Now we're going to have our sci-fi shooter. It's like so weird. Monsters, like fantasy monsters that you catch and fight. It's just like it's like everything was like struck with inspiration.
Yep.
When Miyamoto died, actually, you know what? He's kind of stepped away from gaming already. I think you feel it a little bit. When was the last new amazing Nintendo franchise? Was it Pikmin? And would you put that in the same pantheon as the rest of these? Probably not.
I mean, not the cultural impact, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's tough because they've sort of been banking on their main franchises for so long that it has kind of stunted the development of anything new.
And they're doing it wonderfully. I mean, Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild is the two most recent examples where holy shit, great.
Yeah.
So,
and of course, the inverse is also true because fans so badly want new games in these series, they sort of push aside anything new that does come out. Like if a Direct comes out and it doesn't have an announcement of a new Metroid game, everybody loses their minds when there's like 3 other quality games that are in it. So, I don't know. It's sort of a system they brought in themselves by having such heavy hitters in their lineup, but it is kind of a shame to see. Yeah. Number 8 is God of War parentheses 2018, which I didn't put because the release date is down there. But obviously we're talking about the more recent one and not the original. I didn't vote for it. I haven't played it. It's the only game in the top 20 I have not played, and that's because I played Elden Ring in the lead up to this and not this. So I cede the floor.
Well, okay. So I'm gonna story time.
This is good. This is good, Dave, because we have very different perspectives.
Yes.
On this.
But God of War 1, 2, 3. Tried to play the first one. Couldn't stand it. I hate button mashers for the most part. I don't like running in, and I'm bad with combos. I'm not good at Street Fighter because I can't remember combos. I'm bad at it. I just am. Sean tells me, Dave, you gotta play God of War. I'm like, what? God of War? No, fuck that. I hate God of War. It's so stupid. No, Dave, seriously. You're gonna love it. I'm like, really? Like, you're gonna make... Okay. I play it. The fact that I walk in, emotional hit up front, scary hit up front when this guy comes to your door and beats the shit out of Kratos like this god. I'm like, okay, all right, well, now I'm interested. I got to see where this is going. And then you explore the world. You travel between dimensions, basically. You go to all these different worlds, all the while bonding with your son in a way that I'm just like, please love each other. I want this so bad for both of you. I couldn't. And then the end, the whole thing, you go through this epic adventure, and the whole thing is, I want to scatter my mother's ashes on this mountain. That's it. It's perfect. It's so fucking good in so many ways.
And it's what you're just never going to be able to replicate again. Like even the sequel. I think it's great. I can't wait for you to play it. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they can't return to the simplicity of it's just a quest to spread the mom's ashes.
It's so great.
You can't do it anymore, right?
No.
And that kind of sucks because it's so personal from the moment the game starts and he's so solemn by the tree. Mm-hmm. And you're like, wow, this is so... And Dave, the perspective I was talking about was I played 1, 2, and 3. So all I've seen is this like rage-filled dude. Most notable in my experience is every game has a puzzle where you basically have to sacrifice a person to solve the puzzle. One that has like you put them in the gears and it clogs the gears and then you can solve it. It's like he's like a horrible kind of person and you kind of root for him, but you also kind of don't. And so to see this journey now, so ballsy. Like I can't believe that they decided to do this. A mix with some great writing, great performances. Honestly, like the combat is the worst part, and it's good. It's solid, and it's fun. But like you're there for the story. The one take camera at all times. It's just like a great idea. It's like you're always with the action. Man, I could go on and on. I just think this is phenomenal. And I was worried that the sequel came out. I was like, what if it's going to be better? And I realized like it's very, very good. But this game just captured like this lightning in a bottle that you just can't duplicate it.
I mean, you feel the growth of Atreus throughout the whole game. Him turning in from a whiny, scared kid to a petulant kid who thinks he knows everything to, hey, we got to work together, Dad. You feel that growth throughout the game. You feel Kratos' growth of being I'm an angry person who finally found love and don't know how to bond with my son to, crap, I lost my wife. What do I do now with this punk kid? To, no, we can work together and make a great team. You have the humor aspect from, I wish I remembered his name, but the head basically you have on the back of your, yeah, humor out the ass. Like I thought he was a fantastic addition to this
Sindri,
game.
Underrated. I forgot there's a scene where you show up and he's like, hey, and he throws you an apple and you just hold your axe and it splits. And he's like, oh.
Okay.
It's so good.
Just so much of this game was so fantastic. The voice acting was great too. I think Freya, I can't remember, sorry
Freya.
I'm saying it wrong, but fantastic character. The twist in that too. Just I could praise this game for so long. So a fucking God of War game that if you would have told me 10 years ago that I'd be voting it this high, I would have told you crazy.
Yeah. And you're lucky in a game if you have like a big moment, like the moment that everybody's going to talk about. This one had like a few of them immediately coming to mind. I think when Kratos steps out of the light and he's like, what the fuck is your deal? And he stops mid-sentence because he thought he was only gone for like 2 minutes. He's been gone for like, I don't know, a day. Yeah. And his son has been fighting to stay alive the whole time. And then obviously the river when you're going back to get the chains. And it's just for the most part, a quiet, like the music's going and it's just kind of meditative. Amazing.
The moment of, I didn't even feel this because I didn't play the first 3 games, but when he puts the Blades of Chaos back on.
Yeah.
And you're like, I felt that and I didn't even care about the first few games. And I felt it.
Yeah.
It's sort of remarkable because, I mean, you can make the case, and I think this is something we're going to have to do at some point, that this is up there with the best video game series of all time now. Because the first 3 are critical darlings, even though they were sort of panned for some of their choices at the time, chief of which for me was the QuickTime events, but that was more of a relic of the era than it was this series in particular, because everything in the late 2000s had fucking QTEs. So, like, now you can start having that conversation, especially because Ragnarok, again, maybe it's not quite that level, but it's an excellent game. It's
amazing.
Right?
Yeah.
So you could have that conversation now because there's 5 games in this series that count for all intents and purposes and not, side whatever. But, like, how remarkable, because, like, I'm a God of War hater, especially the early 3 games. For me, it represented a lot of what I disliked about gaming back then, and because Kratos had the emotional depth of a fucking salamander, I wasn't all that interested in them, especially because of the QuickTime events and everything else, right? And the button mashy combat. Now, I will play this game. I haven't gotten to it yet. I will. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when, because it has that emotional depth. It has that character growth. It has humor and good writing and stuff that I care about. So now I'm intensely interested. I was not before.
Yeah.
It's so good, man.
I never would have played it if it wasn't for Sean. So for that, I thank you.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
So for every Returnal, there's also a God of War.
Exactly. Yeah. I could go on and on, but I'll stop.
If anything else, Sean and I glowing about the same things in this game should be enough of why we have it ranked this high.
Yeah.
What were the rankings on this, Chris?
Oh yeah, good call. That was, I'm in the numerical list. Hold on. A 3rd, a 5th, an 8th, an 11th, and a 12th.
Jesus.
So 5 votes, which some games have more, but all of them in the top 12.
Yeah, that did it.
and I will say the gameplay, like, solid, not great, but the puzzles are good, and the axe. I know you're supposed to use the chains. I use the axe as much as I can.
Absolutely.
The throwing of the axe and recalling it is like one of the best mechanics in any game I've ever played.
And the puzzles of using the axe to freeze it, run around, go do something else, and then call it back.
Yep.
And I don't know, Kratos is such a badass too, and he's like, and he just like yanks it out. I don't know. There's just something every single time. He's like, yes.
Well, and it's so funny because they play to like, they're like, oh, that was smart. And he's kind of like, yeah, I'm not an idiot. And if you played the first 3 games, yeah, I'm a douchebag. Yeah. But like, I'm always solving crazy puzzles. So they just know the character so well. And the fact that it's the same team that did the first games, that did these 2 games is very confusing to me. Because there's so much maturity here that just was not present before.
Well, and I guess you kind of need it, right? Because like you said, the callback to the earlier chained weapons or whatever, like you need to have that emotional resonance from the earlier games to make some of that land, which is not going to for me. But like Dave said, for somebody who didn't care about those games, it still will. So I guess props to them for being like, all right, here's what we had as a base. Now let's build on it rather than just reiterate. Yeah. That's phenomenal.
And one thing they did, this won't be a big thing on the newer systems, but the load times in between, the fact that they filled it with great dialogue, filled it with story building, character building in the load times, things like that. I thought it was fantastic the way they did it. It's like,
so smart.
Oh, Atreus is going to climb on Kratos' back for 10 seconds. That's weird. Oh, there's a reason for that. It's a load screen. But
it's an underrated factor. But like Mass Effect did it well too.
Yeah.
Hiding their load times behind different vehicle transfers and elevators and whatever, but having things to fill it with, conversation, whatever. It's much better than just having a screen that has some kind of spinning logo.
Yeah.
So
or
props to them for that.
Yep.
So I told you there was a clear line of demarcation between the top 7 and everything else. This game had 345 points with its 5 votes, which got it to number 8. That's a big amount of points with the way the system worked. Our number 7 game is The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker.
It jumped.
6 votes, 427 points. There's another jump that separates the top 3 from the rest of the top 7. But again, everything below this was separated by almost 100 points, which is a first place vote worth of points. So let's just call it what it is. Everything else here is kind of on its own level. We have 2 here, and then obviously the top 5.
This is like the gold tier, platinum tier. This is platinum tier now.
Yeah, because everything before this is gold. There's some big time gold in there, but this is the best of the best. Starting here, not just with our top 5 video next week. These were the ones that were head and shoulders above everything else.
I don't know how to feel. So this was the beef that I alluded to, and it's soft beef. It is not ground beef or hard beef because I don't know how to feel about it. I love Wind Waker. You know I love Wind Waker. It's one of my favorite Zelda games, but I'm like, how many votes are we going to waste on Zelda? We have Breath of the Wild, somewhere, I'm sure, on this list. We have the Zelda games that we've already done. It's like, and if you really break it down, Twilight Princess. Realistically, how many games in our top 25 is Twilight Princess better than? Like quite a few, probably. So like at some point we have to draw the line, or it's going to be all Zelda. And I think I drew the line with Wind Waker. I don't think I voted. No, I did somewhere. You'll get to it eventually. You're balancing work too, Chris. So
3rd, 9th, 7th. I did that in the wrong order. Sorry, I'm reading left to right. So 3rd, 7th, 9th, 15th, 31st.
Was 31st mine?
Yes.
Okay, so it didn't make my top 25, but I still had to throw out some points. I mean, I fucking love it. I'm just like, when are we going to draw the line with Zelda?
Well, I mean, like we were just saying earlier about Nintendo putting out a new intellectual property, new stories, breaking ground. Why would they when they keep knocking it out of the park with every single time they put out their franchises? I mean, when Wind Waker came out, a lot of people gave it shit, I think, because they expected the great graphics. I love these freaking graphics. I loved it at the time. I love it now. I love the fact that they used Link's eyes to draw your attention to different places. I love sailing. I love finding the Triforce. I love the fact that you kind of had, this relationship with your sister. They unlocked things into the Great Zelda game. There's this mystery of why you're on the ocean. So much about this game is so freaking good. It's so clean. The battle tactics you use is great. I think
it might be the best combat in the whole series.
I think so too.
It might be.
I don't know. I really have to think long and hard. This might be my favorite Zelda. I think. God, it's hard to say, but it might be my favorite.
I don't have to think long and hard. It is my favorite Zelda, and I think it is the best Zelda. Not the most influential, not the most pivotal, but as far as just a standalone product and a game from start to finish, I would argue Wind Waker is the best of the series. To address Sean's point, because I said I would back when we had beef in the honorable mentions section, I am increasingly becoming tired of voter fatigue. So I almost go the opposite way now, where it's like, Michael Jordan should have won like 8 MVPs.
Oh, yeah.
But because they were so eager to give it to something else, to give somebody else their flowers, now we have these years where like fucking Karl Malone won an MVP. And we look back on that and we go, okay, great. Like, he had a good year, maybe even a great year. He was a really good player in the 90s. Like, it's probably right that he has one. But if you look at it empirically, he shouldn't. Because Michael Jordan was the best player on every goddamn team he played for in the entire decade of the 90s.
Charles Barkley suffers too. I'm a Suns fan, but Jesus, like, he should not have won it that year.
No, should not be an MVP. We love Barkley. He's great. Phenomenal. You didn't think we were going to work basketball into this, but we fucking did.
We found a way.
So, like, I understand where you're coming from, and if I felt like games were being crowded out by there being 4 Zeldas in our top 25, then I would be a little bit more sympathetic to it. But for me, I'm like, if these are the best games of all time, then everybody else should get on their fucking level.
Yeah.
We should have a conversation about why other game franchises have not been able to consistently produce excellent caliber games of this quality.
Why is it that every time I open a Zelda game and open a new experience, I am blown away? I mean, Twilight Princess might be my least favorite out of all of them. It's still really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's amazing.
I'll start with the cons. I don't really like any of the sequences where you're not Link.
Fair.
Those aren't very good. I wish there were more dungeons.
Same. I mean, there's 4, and this sort of became the benchmark going forward for the franchise, if any.
Yeah. I guess a con that people had that I didn't really have, but like the sort of third act, like go find these 8 things. People thought like, oh, there's so much story momentum. Now I have to go. I didn't mind it because that's kind of the whole game. It's like it's C, so of course they're buried. I thought it was fun. Those are the only cons I have. But the pros, like again, like combat, fast, fluid, almost musical, sort of.
Yeah.
Both in presentation, but also there's like a little like the sounds that you hear when you get the sword strikes consecutively. Story, I mean, best Zelda story ever. So dark.
It's so dark.
So dark for being cartoons.
Yeah, and like Twilight Princess wishes it was this dark. It looks this dark.
Yeah.
And there are some darkish moments in it. I'm not trying to throw shade at Twilight Princess, no pun intended. But like, this is a vibrant, beautiful, kid-looking game that has stunning depth to it.
Yeah, remember the world? Yeah, it was flooded.
Yeah, it drowned.
Everybody's dead. We lost.
The only thing that matters is the mountaintops. Now they're islands, and you better figure something out.
Yeah,
remember your king? He's a boat now.
Yeah. Yeah, we lost. That's
Ganon ruined us, man.
It's actually over. And in the end, you kind of lose too, but the king is on top of it. Or you lost again. And then you're going to stab him in the head.
What a great...
the greatest...
Yep.
Oh my God.
Yep. The best ending sequence of a video game.
Maybe ever?
For me, maybe ever. Certainly in the franchise, which again has its share of other pretty solid ones. Like, Link gets the Triforce at the end of Link to the Past, but it's nowhere near Wind Waker for me as far as, like, emotional resonance because the whole build-up's great. Like, the Phantom Ganon exploration part of the final dungeon's great. The 3 different puppet Ganons are great. But then you get into the fucking top of that whole tower, and there's, waterfalls cascading as this area's about to drown, and Zelda eventually ends up helping.
She helps you, and that's so cool.
Man, oh man.
And the fight evolves as you go through it. It's
Yep.
like he starts learning your tricks, and you got to find new tricks.
And you think you've got him. I know Chris has said this on the show before, but when you get the first, you attack him, he blocks, you parry him, you hit him, and you're like, I got this. He blocks behind his back. You're like, oh my fucking God, now what do I do?
Yeah.
One of the hypest moments I've ever had in a video game. It still holds up now. It's hard to describe to people because it just doesn't land quite, because you've seen other stuff like that. But man, at the time, the fact that they train you to do that and then take it away from you, I was just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And then this cartoony game, you've got fucking Tingle over here making an ass out of himself throughout this entire game. And then he stabs Ganon in the fucking forehead. Yeah. And Ganon laughs.
It made it sound like you were saying Tingle stab him in the head.
Yeah, exactly. Pronouns are complicated.
Would have been real interesting. But
I remember seeing Tingle throughout this stupid game. I'm like, what? You're so dumb. I fucking hate you, Tingle. But then you come to this other area where it's so dark and Link grows enough to stab Ganon literally in the forehead. And Ganon laughs at you. Oh, the best ending.
I don't know what you call this. Well, I guess it is an intro sequence. It's up there on one of the best intro sequences too, because the song is fucking fire. And it's just interesting. They're like, yeah, this thing happened. All the people waited for the hero. He never came. So there you go. Way to subvert it from the word go is like, oh yeah, the hero always shows up and like, well, he didn't. So now the world is flooded. It's so good.
And you're sleeping on a pier, so figure it out.
Yeah.
Your sister likes seagulls. She's gone now. All right, well, I guess we'll go deal with that.
And then you got to go in and like, you have this, you are completely fish out of water, out of your element, where you're sneaking around this thing. And if you get caught in this place, you're done, man. You ain't fighting out of this.
And I hated that sequence at the time just because I kept getting caught and I kept trying to do, and I wanted to fucking strangle someone. But it was because I wasn't playing well enough. And now as I look back, I'm like, yeah, like it's only that one part. It takes like an hour tops. And what it represents is far more important than actually, like, you feel like you want to swing your sword because it's a Zelda game, but that's the whole point. So like for me, this was my number 3 this time. It was not this high when I voted for it last time. Part of that, of course, is the re-release, which cleans up a few of the issues the first version had. It adds the Swift Sail. It takes away some of the issues with the Triforce charting. It makes it so like you don't have to take so many trips to and from with Tingle to pay him off. Like, it fixes what handful of small issues there were with the first version of this. So it went up for me. And again, 7 feels about right. I don't think it can be any higher, but I don't have any qualms with putting it third because I think it's my favorite and the best, even if there are ones that are more important.
Yeah. I like it.
So it was number 9 last time, number 7 this time. Our number
the fact
6.
that I'm getting giddy talking about these. Like I can feel the excitement in me going back in these. It's unlocking feelings I haven't had for a while.
I haven't even shaded you that much this time.
Because he's in such a good mood.
Yeah.
When he's in a bad mood, then you go right under the bus.
Well, and you haven't done stupid votes either. That would have. If I was like, I love Pokemon, you're like, well, I guess you didn't vote for Pokemon, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But if you not only shit on Pokemon, but then also voted for what's a Superman 64, you'd be like, wait a minute.
Well, Detroit Become Human was a fantastic.
Yeah, that's a better example of I vote.
Excellent storytelling.
Heavy Rain is my number 2
The
game.
subtle messaging that David Cage employed.
I just love the fact of how women are written in Heavy Rain. It's so great.
Yeah, they're definitely not there as eye candy or just emotional manipulation. No.
Put a baby in me.
Number 6, perhaps somewhat appropriately, is Final Fantasy VI. Number 8 in our previous list. It's no surprise that it was going to still be up here. I am a little bit surprised it moved up rather than down.
Because 9 fell off the face of the earth. So
I felt like 9 spots, but it did fall from in the top 25 to out of it.
Yeah.
This moved up. 10 moved up. So it's interesting how time has passed because, again, these are all out well before the last iteration of the list. So it's not like that changed, and more games that we liked have come out since then. So maybe it pushed it down. It also could be a reflection of the fact that our panel seems to really like the Super Nintendo classics. So either way, I'm going to pull this up real quick because I forgot to in advance. It is a 2nd, a 4th, a 6th, and a 14th for its 5 votes. So while 5 is a little bit of an outlier at this stage, because every game above it has more votes, it also had some hugely high placements.
I don't know, when I played this game, at that point, it took a really long time for another game to make me as emotional as this game did. A really long time. This is one of the first epic games I've ever played. And I mean, everything about it, I love. I don't even know where to start. I love everything they do with the story.
I'll tell you where to start.
Okay.
The very beginning of the story where you hit the ground running. You have no idea what's going on, but you're in these awesome mech suits that just fuck everything up.
Yep. That's great. You're the weird girl, and then she so that's a great introduction to the decentralized protagonist. Because you're with her, and then you're kind of with the guy. I named him Luke. I forgot what his real name is now.
Locke.
That was another fun thing about that. Yeah,
I did that too.
Yeah. And, you follow these different characters, and then they split you up, which I know Chris doesn't always like, and I sometimes have issue. I loved it here because it felt like a awesome TV show where they do that. Like, this group's going to go over here. They're going to have their own very separate adventure. And then you're going to follow this other group on this weird quest with ninjas, and they're going to fall off a waterfall
and fight a train.
Yeah. And it's so different, but each one is so good, and you can tackle it in any order in this section too, which I think is so smart. And then when they link up again, you're like, okay, here we go. Time to save the day, because I didn't know about the pacing. No, the whole world gets destroyed. And that's just the end of Act 1. To this day, I kind of can't believe that they did that. They're like, yeah, you lose. And then it's up to you to kind of, maybe the storytelling mechanic I love more than any is got to put the team back together.
Yeah.
Like that old cliche, but I love it.
It's going to kind of show, too, because we just talked about it with Wind Waker, and there's at least 2 games in our top 5 where you can argue it's the same thing.
Yep.
It's a world that's ripped asunder. And in the particular case of Final Fantasy VI, you don't even have to get the whole gang back together.
Yeah.
There's only, I think, 3 or 4 characters that are required. And from that point on, you can go around and recruit everybody you want to, see what they're up to since the world got sundered, pull them out of deep depression, whatever the case might be. But you don't have to. You can be like, all right, I have my airship back. This is the 4 of us that are going. And the girl who was the lead character at the very beginning of the game isn't one of those required characters. She's running an orphanage. So if you want to recruit her to help save the world, great. But you don't have to because they wrote the story so well.
Yeah.
How was this would not be written today? But you come back after the world's ruined, and you can control a character you haven't really been with that long, if I remember properly. And she's trying to nurse her old man back to health. And if you don't catch the fish, she tries to commit suicide.
Yep.
Holy shit! It's a Super Nintendo game. Whoa.
Yeah, and you don't spend a ton of time with Celis in this game. You find her in a dungeon chained up, and lock sets her free. They have some nice little moments, and then all of a sudden she's in an opera, and that's one of the most emotional moments of the game.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, Dave, after that, the party split for a bit. You get some moments with her, especially with Leo, kind of figuring out their place as ex-Empire people. And then she becomes the most emotionally resonant character in the cast. Her and Locke take turns having these gut punches the entire fucking game. And it's really beautiful that they end up together.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's so rare for games to do that, where you start with a character and you can make arguments like, oh, maybe this other character gets a bit of the limelight. But like, to your point, like, you don't ever even need to recruit Tara again.
Yeah. Mind-boggling.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then the main villain, sometimes they try to be subtle with villains. Sometimes you try to go like, oh, I can kind of see his point. I kind of see where he's going. I don't agree, but I get it. Kafka? Nope. He is just batshit crazy.
So what's interesting about him, I was like, okay, like, so games always do this the first time I'm playing through it, like they're kind of comic relief, whatever. Let's bring on, but like Team Rocket. Kefka and Team Rocket were on the same level for me of like, well, they're not really a threat. Until he poisoned the entire village. It was really unfortunate the whole village drank the water at the same time. But then he destroys the world. And it's so... I want to write a story where I do this, where a sort of pseudo-finale is being pit between like two forces. And then a third party just comes in and is like, oh, hey, by the way, I'm going to ruin everything. And I was kind of on the outside, so surprise. And now it's all to shit. And what's scary about me is I'm just chaos. So like the Empire, it wasn't good goals, but they had goals. Kev's like, I just kind of want to do whatever I want.
I'm just a dog chasing cars.
Yeah.
Because, obviously Kefka has the iconography that looks sort of like a clown, and we can make the easy Joker comparisons, but the fact remains, like, for all the people that love Sephiroth, and they've come a long way with Sephiroth over the years, so I've kind of softened on this because they've given him more depth. But, like, for me, I was all about Kefka because, like you said, he just shows up and he fucks things up. He's like, oh, yeah, the Emperor, like, Gestal, you thought he was the main bad guy. Yeah, I'm throwing him off this cliff. I don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
I have unlimited magic power now, so you and your lifeless body, see you later.
But I think it taps into, like, such a nightmare of, like, the wrong person getting, like, if Superman was an asshole, which some stories he is, but
yeah, they
like,
tried
that's
that.
so interesting to me, and it's unlocked with Kefka. It's like the worst person possible now just got all these powers. What are you going to do about it? It's amazing. The music is great. The combat is really solid. There's so much depth, and like the Sabin, who's my boy, the best character of the game. I love his thing. And if you like double tap, that's like the trick. Dave, I don't know if you knew this.
I did. My problem was when the first time I played this through was on the Wii Virtual Console, and it didn't work properly.
Oh, no.
So I was like, ah!
And like you can, like at level 70, he has like the best attack, but then you can like find it secretly before that. And it's just loaded with shit like that.
Magicite system's fun. Not the best learning system the series has had. 10 we talked about. 9's system is really good. 4 is better than 6 in that regard. But like solid, just learning stuff from the Espers.
Yeah. Is it the best overworld music?
Can make the case.
In games.
There's multiple absolute stellar tracks in the overworld in this game.
Yeah.
Give me a reminder of the overworld music in this one.
Well, Terra's theme serves as the first half before the world gets fucked. That's the do-do-do-do-do. Do-do-do-do. And then the World of Ruin one has a couple different versions. There's one that's very organ heavy that they actually played at one of the concerts we went to, which I was stunned by. I was like, wow, like at a live setting, that one really hits home in a way that like I wasn't expecting. I don't know if that's the nostalgia. So like, I mean, we know that like this has some of the best music in the series. Like this and a couple other games are like, I look at this as like a million A-. And there's a few that are even better than that, but like the whole soundtrack is really good.
I just like when I look at how games are developed, yeah, of course, like being able to do the shine jump thing in Metroid is like, oh, that's really cool. But to me, it's like, who thought of the idea that when you take a boss's life to 0, it goes and the screen flashes and it's away. Like that's just genius and like super iconic. But like, wait, there's no need for that. They could have just died. It's brilliant.
Here's what I think about games like this. How much did games like this in the early 90s bring video gaming to legitimacy when it comes to storytelling as an art form? Because when I think about Mario, great gameplay, fun, but this had cartoony looking characters and dark topics dark stuff where it's like, this is real. This is like storytelling, not just running around a level.
I would even push back on cartoony because I mean, sprites, there's only so much you can do, but like all the artwork was like very like, I don't know. It's a mature, artistic. I don't know.
Amano has a very particular style that is certainly mature, I think is a good word for it.
It's very cool.
But I mean, and I also think Dave's onto something to an extent, but I don't think these games got this credit then. Now, I think that's where like Final Fantasy VII, I think, was more important, just in the sense of like bringing an RPG-esque story to the mainstream. I think retrospectively now these games get a ton of credit, but at the time, I don't know, because I remember I played all these and I was like, man, nobody really seems to talk about this. They're all talking about like the newest, like shiniest games that are just fun to play, not these deep story experiences. So I think we eventually got there, but it took some time.
Game Informer had this is their number one game of all time, which I mean, I don't think it's number one, but I'm like so much respect for throwing the value this way. I love this game. 2nd, 4th, 6th, 14th.
You know, I feel bad. Like I never finished this game, and I'm sad that I didn't.
But you still liked it.
I still did.
I mean, that's a testament to the game. You probably should just find a way to. Didn't you get to like the very end though?
I got to the part where I split up all my parties at the very end, and I didn't level up parties enough, and I kind of had the save file in the wrong spot. And I'm like, well,
yeah, that's rough.
This is one of those where I'm like, yeah, it would be great if you finished it, but like you basically have. You've seen just about everything there is to see.
Yeah,
with the
I
game.
think I just need to Google, like YouTube the final boss battle.
Yeah. You've seen Dancing Mad in its full glory, so you're fine.
Yeah.
That's the end of our 15 to 6. This video is probably the longest of the bunch because we only have 5 games to do next week. Granted, we're going to talk about them a little more, but our top 5 will be coming next week. And of course, just as a reminder, the final version of that is the last week of the year, which means our first episode of 2023 will be our best of 2022. And then eventually we'll get back to regular programming, but I'm having a blast. I hope you are too out there. Join us next Tuesday. Again, same time slot. It'll be premiering at the usual time, but of course it's not live because we recorded this in advance. So if you're hanging out after the holidays, we may even be watching along as well. I'm going to try and join the live chat. So we'll be back next week with our countdown from 5 to 1. Thank you for watching. In between episodes, you can find us at our website, objectionnetwork.com or youtube.com/objectionnetwork for videos 5 to 7 days a week. We'll see you next time.